I'm joined by Brian Spears, co-founder and CEO of New Age Meats. Thank you so much for joining me, Brian.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here.
The way I like to start these conversations is really by taking a step back, just to sort of lay the foundation and asking the question of what problem do you and the team at New Age Meats solve?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The biggest question is, why do we eat meat and what does it provide to us?
Mm-hmm.
And you can kind of address that in a couple ways. So meat, we have as evolved organisms, we've evolved over time. I mean, if you go back billions of years ago, when life first started, there are quickly evolved, we'll say, organisms that took their nutrients from the environment, and then some organisms that decided it was faster to just kill the other organisms and eat those. And so you kind of get this, we'll say, carnivore versus, we'll say, wherever else they get their nutrients. And this is a long time ago, but of course, over the billions of years, that's evolved. And so as organisms, we've always been eating each other, or at least some of us have always been eating the others. And we as humans have evolved to have some of that DNA. And of course, we're omnivorous, so we can eat the plant-based side, and we can also eat the carnivorous side, the meat side. And inborn in us is that innate, for some of us, desire to eat meat. And so it's worth asking what that question is. Or it's worth asking what that desire is. So what happens when we smell meat, when we taste meat, when we see meat, when we're eating it, when we're chewing it, when we swallow it, like what is that sensory experience of eating meat? And culturally, meat fits a place in our families, in our nation, in our recipes, on our state, on our plate, excuse me. And so it's worth understanding, if we're going to go and recreate meat, which is what we're doing, how will it fit on the plate? How will it fit surrounded by typically veggies or carbs or something like that? How will it cook on the grill? How will it cook in a stew? And what types of culinary traditions are we trying to observe and respect? And so if we step back as a company trying to recreate meat, we can ask these fundamental questions. What is the human need, or like the sensory experience? And then what is the cultural need? And we find that we can use, instead of using this very old technology of creating meat inside of an animal and then eating the animal, we can go and make meat an entirely different way. And that's really the problem I'm trying to solve.
It's incredible. I think it's so interesting to think about the sensory and cultural elements of meat when you're essentially recreating it, because you're absolutely right. You need to think about those 2 points. Otherwise, your product doesn't actually really fit.
Precisely.
Because what you're doing at New Age Meats is you're not creating an alternative. It's not a plant-based version. It is meat.
Exactly. Yep.
So it needs to actually match. And I mean, on your website, you're talking about starting with the taste and making it better, right? So I mean, what does that actually mean?
Right. So it goes back to what we're talking about with that sensory experience. So taste is not just the taste of like your taste buds, your sweet and savory, umami, or really sweet and salty and bitter and umami, these tastes in your taste buds, but then also it's the aroma, right? So it's when you inhale, when you breathe out, you're getting all of these volatile organic compounds, all of these types of tastes that come from not just the meat itself, but what happens when the meat is cooked and prepared. And so what we're doing and have done and will continue to do is really explore the sensory aspect of eating meat. And that involves literally eating it and at the same time taking a very scientific approach to understanding what happens when you chew and eat food, but then also cook it. And so you can then go find certain biomarkers. You can find certain markers inside of the product, inside of meat, that then correspond to our sensory perception. And when you can make that pairing, then you could go, in our case, upstream to the cells themselves and say like, aha, this is really important to the taste. Up here in the cells, this is where it comes from. So then how can we improve that? Really, can we turn the dial up on the consumer experience such that they taste that even more, like it's even better? And then we can also ask really just much more interesting questions, because we can ask, well, right now, the conventional meat that we eat has kind of this subset of flavors, because there's only so much that you can engineer an animal to give you more flavors, different flavors. But we are entirely unfettered by the animal. So we can go into this broader space of flavor, and we can start mixing and matching in ways that are just entirely unknown, frankly, and just really exciting. So you'll be able to taste something that is reminiscent of, in the future, you'll be able to taste something that's reminiscent of the meat that we're eating now, but then an entirely new and interesting and enhanced flavor.
Wow.
So yeah,
That's incredible. And so, I mean, what are the implications environmentally of basically removing the animal from the process?
well, they're huge. And it's no secret that the way we make meat now is entirely unsustainable. And we can again go look back at our past as humans, as Homo sapiens, that we have traditionally started to raise the livestock that that we're able to raise because they were amenable to being corralled, and they didn't kill us, and they didn't jump over the fence, and they're like, and they're good enough, and we could good enough satiation wise and taste wise. We're like, okay, we're going to standardize on these, not because we had a panel of meats and we decided which one was the tastiest and the healthiest, the safest, the most sustainable. Meat technology hasn't changed for thousands of years, and we're right now at this new era, this new age, where we can really start to change how that tastes to us. I'm going back to the taste a little bit, but I'll answer your question specifically around sustainability, which is these old animals that we've been using. We essentially said that, hey, as we grow in population, as we ramp up like this, we can just take the animals with us. We can keep making animals, the animals that we've been eating, and we can make as many as we need to in order to eat as much as we have previously. But not only that, we can actually eat more, because we can make a system that intensifies the animal agriculture so much that we can drop that cost down. The problem is there's a whole bunch of, in economics we call them negative externalities. There are tremendous negative externalities to the planet, to our public health, and of course the animal's welfare. And sustainability wise, we see that we can fix some major problems around the planet. And so if we go into the planet, then it's the greenhouse gas emissions, it's the water use, it's the land use, and it's the energy, where the energy comes from. And I will say the greenhouse gas emissions would be the direct greenhouse gas emissions as compared to the greenhouse gas emissions born from energy. So like burning coal, for instance, is an indirect greenhouse gas emission, but a direct would be something like a methane production, like cows burping would be methane. So in all those cases, all those four, we are dramatically more sustainable than the existing ecosystem, which makes a lot of sense because we don't have animals that are, for instance, burping up methane. And we don't need to have giant acres for animals to graze and to spread out. And we don't need to use nearly as much water because we're not actually keeping these animals alive for months or years. What we're doing is we're growing just the cells that you need to eat, that you want to eat. And so that cycle of taking the cells, growing them, and then eating them is much shorter, and it's much more efficient.
Right. Yeah. You're basically growing the meat without the animal.
Correct.
And what are you actually creating with those, currently at least, with those cells that you're growing?
What are we creating? So what's the end product?
What's the end product?
So,
yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So most of our IP is in pork. So we've worked with other animals as well, but we find that we can move much more quickly with pork. Just because pork is pig is a model organism for humans. So there's a lot of research published on pig. And so we have really kind of two broad products. They would be, for a Western market, we're focusing first on sausages, like pork sausages. And for Asian markets, more dumplings, like pork dumplings. And that's it. Yeah.
That's awesome. And why sausages specifically? I mean, when I first saw it, I thought, what an interesting choice out of, so you mentioned two. I'm just curious to know why specifically sausages and not, for example, like a pork cutlet or something less ground up.
Well, so when you have a cutlet, pork chop or something like that, then there is the element of eating the animal's anatomy. So there's a tissue engineering experience. So when you bite into a cutlet, for instance, you have that bite because your teeth are slicing through tissue. And that tissue is it's muscle fiber and it's the fibers of muscle that are encased in these myelin sheaths, and then they're bundled together into larger sheaths, and then interstitially you have fat, and then you also have connective tissue in there and blood. And so all of that means that you have this experience of eating the tissue of the animal. And we can do that, but to get there, we need to go through the first step, which is just to create the cells themselves. So to create the muscle, the fat, the connective tissue, we can go create them individually. And what we can do before we get to this structured tissue product would be to just go and mix them. Just go take them and essentially they're the ground products. And there are a bunch of products that are made. Well, the majority of the meat products that are consumed are actually in the minced form, the ground form.
Okay.
And so since there's such a massive market for that, like why wait to get here when there are people clamoring for the product here? So we take that approach. So we're working on this tissue engineering approach as well. But there's just such a huge market now that it doesn't make sense to wait.
Actually, yeah. I mean, there's an argument to not even from a business standpoint to not even go into the non-ground meat market. If the vast majority or the biggest percentages is ground meat, then you may as well just stay there and get really good at that, and kind of, before moving on elsewhere.
Sure. So we intend on being the biggest meat company in the world. We're pretty open about that. And that means that we're going to be making ground products. We're going to be making whole tissue products. So I don't say that we're going to just focus on this. Of course, like that's a massive market. There's going to be a lot of just like market dynamic questions. So where the price premiums come from. So no question that, for instance, a well-tissued steak, marbled steak commands much more of a price premium than a hamburger does. And so when you're using expensive technology, then a lot of companies will think like, well, go for the high end. Mm-hmm. But again, to get that high end, you actually have to create the tissue engineering experience, which is much more difficult. So in our case, we decide, no, it makes much more sense for us to use our cultivated products, the muscle, fat, etc., as ingredients to this sausage. And so we make no secret that our first products are blended. So a blended product where the cultivated meat is a functional ingredient to the plant and the fungal ingredients that come with it. So we're going to make a sausage, for instance, that's going to, when you eat it, it's going to taste like that sausage. It's going to pop in your mouth. It's going to coat the inside of your mouth. It's going to have this bounce and chew that you expect from meat. But then it's also going to have plant and fungal ingredients as well, in order to, one, drop the cost, but also increase the textural experience.
Mm-hmm. So is that because you're aiming to go for the experience of a full meat sausage? Or, I mean, some sausages, like even with normal meat, you put other ingredients in them for flavor.
Exactly.
So it's more of the latter, in the sense that you're doing it for the flavor rather than because you're trying to fake your way to a full meat.
Sorry, we're doing it for the flavor, as in doing.
Yeah, meaning you're going for the flavor, so you're adding additional ingredients because it gives other flavors to the sausage.
Sure, if you're going to do a bratwurst, for instance, then you're going to add certain spices to it. You're going to add some mace to it. You're going to, right? So people expect that, because if not, it's like, well, this isn't bratwurst. So you exactly. Definitely add spices and other types of ingredients to it. Yeah. So there's spice. Yeah. If I'm getting your question.
Exactly. Yeah. Meaning like that's a standard way to make sausage anyway. And so how exactly do you make it? Because I know one thing, and I know there's a lot of, it's quite complicated, and there's certainly a lot of IP around it, so we don't need to go into too many details. But one thing I saw is that with new age meats, you're actually doing something with both the fat and the muscle cells, which I understand is not always the way it's done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So we'll say early on they're very different technologies. Well, very different technologies. They're different. So fat and muscle cells are different, right? And so when you look at the process of creating this, the meat, it starts with some precursor cells. So they can be stem cells or fibroblasts or some sort of precursor to the end cells that you want. Mm-hmm. And then you're going to typically differentiate that precursor cell into muscle or fat. And each of those muscle and fat, and there's connective tissue as well, they require their own set of their own unique ingredient, and then they're also their own unique environment. So what you feed muscle cells and the environment that it's in is different than what you feed fat cells and the environment that it's in. So if you're creating a cultivated meat company like this, and you have a certain amount of investor money that's coming in order to fund you making a first product, the question is, what am I focusing on? Am I focusing on just fat or just muscle or both? And what's the value? And so some companies have decided to work on just one or the other, muscle or fat. We've decided that it makes sense to focus on both, because we're really trying to recapitulate that sensory experience again of eating meat. And so it's important for us to work on both. Yeah.
Wow, interesting. So, I mean, is it possible at some point in time, because you said some would work just on fat. So, I mean, can someone just become like a lard manufacturer?
Well, I imagine they can, sure. So there's the companies that are working on just in fat, I believe, do not quote me, I'm not their PR spokesman. So they would be more of a B2B company. So they would be supplying their fat to some sort as an ingredient to some other company, to some other company's end product.
I see. Okay.
So yeah, much like there's the ingredients all over places, ingredient suppliers to make, if you're going to make a cookie, then you have ingredient suppliers for sugar and for flour, etc. So yeah.
So this whole element of actually taking these cells, growing it, that's what you call cultivated meat.
Yes.
And we were talking about this before we were recording, and there's a few terms now that I've heard, and some of the people who've listened to the podcast have probably heard now: cell-based as well as clean meat. So is there, going back to this question that we were talking about before, is there, I mean, what is the term? Is there one term that unifies them all, or is it still kind of up for debate?
It's definitely debate, and it's definitely worth noting that the name has changed over time. So it was a while ago in vitro meat. I think the first people working on this were saying in vitro meat, which right is even worse than the lab grown. So they went to cultured meat, which I thought was pretty good, but then it has some elements of they chose cultured meat because of cells, like you're culturing cells, so it's scientifically accurate. But then culturing in the food space means something totally different, right? So you're culturing bacteria, for instance, to go make a yogurt. And then if you're making fish, then there's an element of, when you say culture, it typically means aquaculture. So then that's a specific way of intense animal agriculture. And so it was a somewhat confusing term. And so clean meat came about more as a nod to clean energy, right? So there's a way that energy is being made from like coal and oil and such. And then there's a way that's being made from solar and from wind, etc. So because they're more clean. And so it was kind of a nod to that. Moving forward, the industry kind of determined that it was not as successful because it hindered our ability to work with regulators and the existing meat companies. And frankly, you could say like, well, who cares about the existing meat companies? Well, we do and they do. Existing meat companies are actually really interested in what we're doing, because the ones that really get it, the smart companies, consider themselves to be protein companies. They're not slaughtered animal companies. They are protein companies. And so if they can go get the protein that consumers want in a different way, then they're all about it. They're like, sure, let's do that. And so it was easier for us to work with them when we had a term that was kind of more neutral, we'll say. And same thing with regulators, because regulators, especially some of the regulators, have been a long time working with this existing industry. And we just found we could move faster if we got rid of that term. And so there are a couple other terms that have come about. So cell-based was one that I want to say 2018? No, I want to say came about. I think that's right. And I think maybe August of 2018. And since then, another term, cultivated, about the same time last year, maybe the summer of last year, came about. And cultivated we really like because it's a very data-driven name. So the Good Food Institute, GFI, and Mattson together did a survey of a bunch of consumers and asked them not just what do you prefer, but also what's differentiating and what's actually accurate. Like what means something when you read it. It's like, okay, I get what that means, and it's also differentiating from other labels, and then it's also appealing. And cultivated won hands down. And so the data is there. We're a data-driven company, so we use cultivated.
Cultivated is nice, actually, now that I think about it. I mean, cultured, going back to that, cultured, you're right, to me, it just makes me think of mold or petri dishes.
Yeah. Right.
And now that you mentioned yogurt, I agree with that. clean meat is a little bit confusing. I'm not really sure what that actually means. Like, did it fall on the floor and then someone washed it, or
Right.
what happened? Yeah. And cultivated, cell-based, I guess. Okay, fair enough. I don't know, somehow neutral in my mind. And then cultivated, what I like about it is it sounds closer to something being farmed. Because I mean, it's farming is, you cultivate your crops, and at least in my mind, that's the picture that comes up. So there's this very, even though it's completely not pastoral, there is this element of, like farm and something rural about the word cultivate. So cultivated meat still brings up these nice images in my mind. Going back to the actual product, to the sausage, I noticed, and I thought this was a very interesting choice, that because a sausage is basically, I mean, we were talking about, it's ground meat, and you have to hold it all together, right? And so you're using a vegan sausage casing, right? So what's can you tell me a little bit about the casing?
Sure, yeah. So, well, what you're referring to, probably the tasting that we did in September of 2018, and yeah, in that case, we certainly did. And it goes back to kind of what the mission of the company is essentially, we see the process of intensive animal agriculture as being wildly unsustainable, and so it didn't make sense for us to go and use a product of animal agriculture in our products. And so we used a sausage that wasn't a pig intestine, for instance, which is what you would traditionally use. So yeah, in the future, there are any number of much more. We just chose one at that time that we worked with our chef. So since then, we've looked at many other options as well. So we don't make them in house. That's not really our technology. We make the meat, which is more valuable, frankly. So we don't see the need to go and use actual pig intestine, because again, it's opposed to the mission of the company.
Kind of defeats the purpose of the whole thing,
Right.
to a certain degree. And and who's Jesse?
Yeah, so Jesse is the pig that we took the first biopsy from. So in July of 2018, we went to a farm in Marin, which is just north of San Francisco, across the Golden Gate Bridge. Lovely little rural farm. And Jesse was the pig that we biopsied. So we took a very small sample of muscle and fat, and went back and took those cells and took the stem cells out of those.
And she did it. I mean, from an animal welfare point of view, what was without going into too much detail, I mean,
sure.
Nothing happened to her other than the little.
Well, so we have a vet. Yeah. So essentially, there's a veterinarian that you would have there, the animal veterinarian, and so you would give anesthetic to the animal. So you don't want to Jessie. So didn't want her feeling that pain. And yeah, it was a pretty. It's like what you would imagine taking a biopsy for, like a skin biopsy, or if you go to the doctor, sometimes they'll go and give you local anesthetic, and they'll go take a biopsy out of it, out of your skin or out of your muscle or whatever, based on what they're trying to determine. And so it's the same type of thing.
And how did you pick Jessie specifically?
It was through the farm. So we talked to the farm, and one of the owners of the farm was actually also a vet, and so she was there as well. And so essentially, just like, you choose which animal. We know like the type of pig that we wanted, and so she was able to choose Jessie. Yeah.
And that's incredible. And so, are you still using those same cells now?
Well, we since moved on and gotten cells from a variety of sources, so that kind of kickstarted the whole procedure. But there's a lot that we've learned. So in the beginning, it was just like, here's a farm, here's a pig, let's go. So since then, we've done a lot more research onto like what the right type of source is. So we certainly have Jessie cells still, but they're not primary in our research anymore.
Got it. And I mean, in theory, could you just use one biopsy basically forever?
Well, so I think what you're asking would be like immortalization. And so the idea that we would not need to go back to primary cell culture. So primary cell culture would be, or a primary biopsy would be from the animal. Yep. So you go back to the animal, take the meat, the biopsy meat, right, muscle fat, take that from the animal, and then derive the stem cells from it, or separate the stem cells, characterize them, and grow them. So that actually ends up being really difficult from an engineering perspective. If you think about it, each time you go and take a biopsy from an animal, the animals are going to be slightly different, and they're not all the same. I mean, we all have their own like genetic proclivities, which are different, and so we then need to go and like take that, separate out the cells of interest, We need to clean the thing, and then we need to characterize and make sure it's actually the thing we want, and then go and grow it out. So it ends up being just like a system that you don't want to mess with. There's too much randomness into that system. So what makes a lot more sense is to go and standardize on one or a few different cell lines, say a few different cell lines. And so you essentially take initially a biopsy from an animal, that primary biopsy, but then you work to immortalize the cell so that it doesn't senesce, it doesn't stop dividing and proliferating. And so we've done that. So we have our own immortalized cell lines on pig, and that means that we essentially you use them, you freeze them down, and then you can, when it's time to go make more, you can thaw them out, and you feed them cell culture media, which is a nutrient-rich broth, and then they just keep growing again.
So it's almost
so we
like
don't need to go back to the animal.
Yeah, that's incredible. So it's kind of like a sourdough starter.
Yeah, it's like a sourdough starter, but it's also very different.
I'm sure. But yeah, from the point of view of it just growing, and that you have your kind of original, I guess, yeah, little starter culture there.
Right.
And I noticed you mentioned this tasting where you talked about Jesse and all that back in 2018, and you made a big point about it being at a brewery.
Mm-hmm.
What's the importance of the brewery?
Sure, yeah. So we intentionally scouted. I did. It was a hardship assignment
Yeah,
to go
sure.
and scout out breweries that had the big metal vats in the back, right? Like intentionally, I wanted something that the background was these giant steel containers with rivets and bolts and piping and gauges and steam coming out, because I want people to see that what they're consuming is this product of food engineering, of science and engineering, and that we love it. We're like totally cool with that. And I wanted to show that when we're making this product, it's not something to be afraid of, because we already do this. We already eat the products of engineering, of science and engineering, and we're happy with it. And at scale, like our facility is going to look largely like this. It's going to be like a big beer brewery. And so I wanted to showcase that.
That's really cool. I mean, yeah, I think I've been telling some friends about this technology just because it's so fascinating. And the first question, which I'm sure you hear all the time, is, isn't that not natural?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do you approach that?
There's a lot of ways to approach that. The first way, that perhaps obvious, is the meat that we eat now natural?
That's fair enough.
And I don't really need to go into that much detail. And you really just ask the question, people start thinking like, oh yeah, and no, it's not. I mean, if you go to we make pig, so go to a factory farm, a pig factory farm, if you can. Probably can't, but if you can, you would see long sheds. You would see a Pepto-Bismol pink lagoon to the side, which is the manure. It's frankly dangerous to be near it. If you could go inside, you would see pigs that are kept very close together in cages, and they are being fed antibiotics and growth hormones, and they typically don't see the light of day, and then they go to a facility where they're slaughtered. So I ask, what of that is natural?
And that typically ends the conversation.
Depends on who I'm talking to.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's fair. And it's very true. I mean, I think without going too much into detail about the way that currently meat is usually produced, it's the way you're doing it is certainly the animal welfare question is completely out of, I mean, it's just not a question anymore.
Well, sure. And some people care about that to varying degrees. But you could also just say the human health aspect. We are in the midst of a pandemic, which is a zoonotic disease, which means it comes from other animals. In this case, probably came from bat. That seems to be most likely. But that's born from our relationship with meat. We ate the bat. It was most likely, again, from a wet market where people were eating the bats. But this is by no means, it's not to say like, well, let's stop eating wild animals. We should. But H1N1, bird flu, and also swine flu, these are diseases that came from factory farms, from intensive animal agriculture, and they jumped species. And if you think about it, if I were a super villain trying to create a super bug, I couldn't do better than the existing industrial animal agriculture system, because you have all of the same type of animal, all one species, crowded together in very tight and unsanitary conditions. They're all fed a very similar diet, which is not their natural diet, and they're continually stressed. And then add to all of that you have humans in immediate close contact with them, not just petting them, but you kill them and you cut them open and you go inside of their cavities and all the fluids are in contact with the humans. It's designed almost to create these types of zoonotic diseases. And this is just, COVID-19 is just the current iteration. We've had iterations of pandemics and we will have more because of the way we produce meat. So again, going back to our method, we don't have any of that. If you go and look at our pilot facility, right now our pilot facility is designed with one person to run the whole thing.
Wow.
Because it's automated. So that's my background. I'm an engineer, so I'm automation engineer, research industrial automation. And we will not have workers standing shoulder to shoulder, cutting open animals and being exposed to their fluids, and also being exposed, frankly, to each other, right? So you in the United States, the current administration has used their executive power to order meat processors to go back to work, despite the danger to workers. And that's, I think it's problematic because that means a lot of those workers are going to sicken and die because they already have, and they're going to continue to. And we ask, essentially, if we go look at not just, I spoke earlier about the meat that we're trying to create. It's not just creating that same type of meat or that same experience of eating meat or replicating that experience of eating meat, but it's also recreating the process that we use to get there. There's no need for us to have this system whereby workers are shoulder to shoulder cutting open animals and being exposed to their fluids. We can go make a system that is just much more efficient, much safer, so much safer that you would feel fine serving this to your kids and not worry that they will be sick. Because right now, we actually treat meat, if we bring it into our home, it's sometimes like a toxic substance. So if you cut it on a cutting board, do you immediately go and cut vegetables on it? No, you're going to cut a piece of fruit with the same knife and hand it to your kid? No, because you know it's dangerous.
Yeah.
So we can go make meat that is just much safer for your family, for your kids, and for society as well.
I think that's such an interesting point about that last point. It's going back to the question of, is our current meat production process natural? And the fact that, like you said, you would absolutely never consider cutting something with the same knife, cutting meat and then using the same knife for. I mean, I think that's pretty much case in point in terms of thinking about, is it natural? I don't think so. I mean, yeah. Out of curiosity, I'm just so curious. Are you vegan?
That's a great question. I'd like to talk about this. So when I want to say 3 years ago now, when I decided that I was going to co-found a company in this space, I stopped eating meat. I said, like, I think there are always narratives in my head that like it's too difficult to do, or it's bad for you, or any number of things, right? So I was just like, well, let's just try it. Come on, let's see what happens. And I kept it up. And then started the company, and then became vegan, and was frankly fine. It was not that hard, and felt great. And we'll say early last year, as we continued to work on our products and make more and more products, it became increasingly obvious that I'd be not a very effective meat company CEO if I didn't eat some meat. Because one, I'm eating what we're making, but then I'm also comparing that to like the traditional meat. And I have to be able to tell that story. And I've told the story a little bit in this as well. It's just like, what is the sensory experience of eating meat? And what is also when we're trying to go make sausage, and we're talking about sausage and of various cultures, for instance, and the spices, but also like the experience, like actually narrating when you bite into a sausage, it kind of pops in your mouth. The fat kind of coats the inside of your mouth. When you bounce on it, when you chew on it, there's a kind of a bounce to it. So if I don't eat meat, then I'm like narrating that, but it's not in my experience. Somebody else told me that, and it's an interesting ethical quandary, because I can say like, well, I don't eat meat, but then somebody else in the space in my company can go and eat the meat. But essentially, if I think it's right or wrong, if I've made a moral carve out for them to go and eat the meat, why doesn't that apply to me? Like, why do I feel that they're okay to eat it, but I'm not okay to eat it? And So for me, what makes sense is that people in our company are eating meat because we are making the meat, and we have to make a really good product. And if people in the company don't know what the meat tastes like, then we're not going to make a good product, and that includes me. So I don't eat a lot of it. I probably, say on average, like once a month. Eat it. Typically happens when I travel. So I'll do a lot of conferences and that type of thing. So, and I'll go take it out to dinner or something, and then it just ends up being easier. I was like, well, I eat meat a little bit, and this is the time I'm gonna eat meat.
That's a good answer. I like that. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. There is, first of all, how can you make a product, without actually knowing what you're replacing?
Mm-hmm.
And that ethical and moral question about if you're allowing others to eat it because
Right.
you won't eat it. It's an
Mm-hmm.
interesting point. I never actually considered that before. And I think you're absolutely right. It's like, if you're okay with someone else doing it, then surely it's okay if you're doing it, especially if they're going to eat meat instead of you eating meat, like on your behalf.
Right. I mean, if I wasn't involved in, a cultivated meat company, if I was making Legos or something, then like, I don't know that I'd have that moral carve out, right?
Right.
Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
So, but specifically, since this is what we do, and it's also intended to transition the entire system away from this unsustainable method to a more sustainable method and a better future for everybody, and avert the tsunami of climate change that is coming for us. And I think it's the smartest path to do. Smartest path. I would say I'm a lot more utilitarian, and so it just in my mind makes sense.
Cool. As we're starting to come to an end here, how I'm really curious to know just about like a general vision of what you see for cultivated meat or the food industry in general. I mean, you've mentioned already that you want to be the biggest meat company in the world. So that's really cool. I suppose I'm more thinking about, like, we're fast forward like 20, 50 years. What does food look like in your mind?
Such a good question. And I love to talk about this with people that work on meat now, and the people that love meat. There's a question that we get really often, which is, okay, I love Wagyu beef, for instance, or I love a good T-bone or a sirloin. And the question is like, okay, so I love that you got the bone in there and then the fat around the bone. And like, can you make all that again? Because that's the only way I'm going to eat your product. And the answer is yes, we can make all that. We can do all that again, and it's kind of like I said earlier. Like there's a pathway of increasing difficulty, frankly, to go and get those like fully tissue engineered products, there's associated cost to it as well. But then it's worth just stepping back and asking the question, like, okay, why do we go and make that? And I like to often liken it to like the horse and buggy versus the car.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a transition period, pretty quick transition period from everybody, historically, from everybody being horse and buggies, and then like a couple decades later, like it's just almost vanishing. And you can imagine the people in the beginning were like, wow, there's this new technology, the automobile, and like it's like, well, can I get like better reins for the horse? Like, I mean, are you replicating the horse such that I can go from like 30 miles an hour to maybe like 35 or 40 miles an hour? And can you make the stagecoach? Can you make it such that I can see more? I can have more windows, and essentially these are iterations on the old technology. And I'm like, well, we're not iterating on the old technology. That's done. We have like this new technology which does way better things. Like you're asking us to go make meat that hasn't changed for 3,000 years. But we could go make something entirely better. And so I'm always open to people saying like, this is what you want, or this is what we want. Consumers want this. Make this. And I think as the technology unfolds, and going back to the taste as well, looking at the small subset of flavors that we have now, and looking at that much greater set of flavors, not just flavors, but also like sensory experiences, which would be the sight, the sound of it, the feel in your mouth. So that these are all things that the technology enables us to do, the old technology does not. And so the future of meat is wide open. It's tremendously exciting, and frankly, it doesn't involve animals. It doesn't need to. There's no need for animals to be involved in the system in the future. I mean, right now we're taking the biopsies from animals, we're freezing down the cells and such. In the future, we won't even need to do that.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, it's hard to know really what it's going to be, because basically you're inventing it as you go.
Yeah, and I'm so thrilled, like, to be working in the food technology industry, this alternative proteins, or whatever we want to call it. People are going to call it all different things. And I get asked all the time, well, who's going to win? Is it going to be the plant-based? Is it going to be the cultivated? Is it going to be this air protein? Is it going to be like this fungal? Is it going to like, well, nobody wins here. So we're making the product that is taking all of these as supplies in order to go make an increasingly better product. And so the fungus, for instance, provides a lot of like texture. It provides this umami flavor. It provides protein, and we can use that as an ingredient to our product. It's not like we need to be like, no, we're cultivated and they're fungal, and we're not gonna. No, we use their product. We use the plant-based products. We use the cultivated products. We use them all to go make an increasingly better meat. It's the meat of the future. It's the new age.
New age meats. Wonderful.
Exactly.
Good. You should make a name out of that or something.
I'll think about it. I have a lot going on. See what I can do.
One question that's fun to ask is who's your sustainability hero, or who's someone who inspired you to go into this journey?
I mean, even people in this industry, I think, are really inspiring. I think Pat Brown of Impossible Foods is inspiring. Like just what he's done, the tenured Stanford professor track that he was on, that was like smooth sailing till the end of his life. He's like, nope, that's not it. Like I want to go and make something. I want to truly change the world and make it a better place, and he has. I think Impossible's done an amazing job, and I'm inspired by what they've done. So there are a bunch of others in my space. I don't have to look too far.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Brian, thank you so much for your time. This was really awesome. I really enjoyed talking with you. I think the work you're doing is phenomenal, and cannot wait to see what your future looks like, the one that you've described, and with New Age Meats as well. I mean, I think it's going to be so cool. And for anyone who's interested in actually following you or looking it up and seeing some of the videos and actually looking at the product, where can people go to check it out?
Sure, yeah. So the website, newagemeats.com. We're all on all the socials, so on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. We're probably most active on Twitter, so just go and follow. Like I will typically chime in there and tweet pretty often. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. And it's certainly worth taking a look for anyone who's interested, because the product it looks exactly as you expect sausage to look.
Yep. Tastes like it too.
Yeah, there you go. I haven't had a chance to do that, so I can only see it, but like there's nothing surprising about it, which is in fact, in my opinion, surprising. But yeah, Brian, I thank you again for your time. Really enjoyed it. Appreciate it.
I appreciate your time as well. It's fun. All right. Take care.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, give us a 5-star rating. And also, please subscribe, whether on your podcast app or on YouTube. And that way you can be the first to know about new episodes. Thank you very much, and talk to you soon.